These quotes are high praise for a game released 20 years ago, a game that developed a cult following on message boards, a game that has been released 3 times like The Last of Us. Is this game that can't even be played on modern hardware without emulation or paying for a remake worth the hype? That's the question I aim to answer in this video. My name is Kami, and I'm a completionist who reviews games after 100% achievement completion. Short answer? Yes. It is perhaps the most ambitious and technically boundary-pushing title of the PlayStation 2 era. But nobody has a copy of that version, so I bought the PlayStation 3 version, which included technical improvements such as 1080p resolution, trophy support, and a stable 30 frames per second. Imagine you are tasked with climbing a moving mountain which wants to kill you. That is exactly what the goal of this game is. You're placed in a very minimal setting with one goal: kill 16 Colossi. All you have is a sword, a bow, and your horse aggro. In most games, if your weapons hit the boss, you deal damage. In this game, you have to hold your sword, balance yourself, and strike a highlighted sigil whilst the boss tries to shake you off. The simple design is experimented upon with 16 unique boss fights, each with a gimmick on how to kill them, turning encounters into mechanical puzzles. There is no other game I can think of that captured David vs. Goliath like this did. The Colossi aren't just big bosses, they're bosses with shifting phases and unique interactions with their arenas. The challenge is that Wanda was designed to be fallible. Wanda will slip, trip over, and get knocked around like a rag doll. The choice to make Wanda imperfect is not only frustrating at times, but feels downright impossible on the PlayStation 3 version. When you spend a lot of time trying to safely position Wanda, the Colossi decides to violently shake around for up to 30 seconds or so, throwing Wanda off the stable position. 30 seconds is a long time to be stun locked in a recovery animation whilst losing your grip, causing you to restart the entire process. The reason this doesn't happen on the PlayStation 2 version is because the frame rate drops from 30 FPS to roughly 15 at times. This causes animation frames to be skipped, allowing Wanda to strike and climb with less resistance due to the loss in rendered frames and fewer calculations of his position. On the PlayStation 3 version, no frame is skipped, which is appreciated and frustrating. The full animation cycles made it difficult to complete hard mode time attack, as Colossi would have unreasonably precise positions for Wanda to hold onto, or frequent animation locks which prevented stable stabbing attacks, since it caused Wanda to reset. Wanda isn't alone either. He's accompanied by his horse Aggro. I think the horse controls feel rather natural to lead the horse rather than take control of it individually. The issue comes down to certain boss fights where you need to shoot arrows on horseback and the idiot horse decides to gallop into a wall or strut in front of the giant sand snake trying to kill it. There's times the horse will refuse to jump off the geometry and it will grind to a halt. There's times the horse will just run off or blatantly ignore you when you're in a dire situation. Team Eco did this in The Last Guardian 2. It's a deliberate design decision to have the animal disobey you. To a degree, I respect them for making an animal and not some robot. Perhaps my biggest complaint about the game is the camera. There are times the tracking adjusts really well. However, the issue is with the collision detection. The camera is designed to be an object which follows the player within the 3D space. If the camera shifts to any direction where there's an object, it throws a fit. This happens a lot with the camera zooming in on the Colossi when you need to turn around and see, but you can't turn around because the camera cannot physically move. Thankfully, modern games have cameras that phase through objects. The camera isn't a specific issue to this game, however it is very noticeable when I was under the pressure of time attack mode. The moments of frustration happen a lot on your initial playthrough, and for myself, they caused a lot of anger. Having to discover the gimmicks to climb bosses, know their safe spots, and how best to optimize timings is far easier on a second playthrough. If you play this game and you feel frustrated, stick to it, because the second playthrough will convince you that the game isn't impossible. The game will rob you of satisfaction. It will frustrate you. It's through that process of frustration that you will find a satisfying moment of relief when you finally drive your sword through that bastard's head. After that initial playthrough, all that's left is to try time attack mode. Something that frustrated me is that the game only saves if you kill the Colossi during story mode, but not time attack mode. Normal time attack mode is pretty simple. The rewards, however, are questionable. You get a map of lizards and fruit trees, exploding arrows, distraction arrows, and doing more damage. These can only be used if you play normal mode again, but not hard mode. So the only point of the items is to assist with more playthroughs, to grind items you missed, or for more stamina. The repetition in the playthroughs is useful when preparing for time attack mode, but it can cause some burnout when you do an entirely new playthrough to get more stamina to climb the temple. Hard mode plays almost exactly the same as normal mode, with the exception of some more sigils and taking more damage. The experience does feel repetitive when the bosses are killed using the repeated methods. I didn't even use hard mode items, as they don't provide value if you're like me and did all of the collectibles on normal mode. I have to admit something to you. I enjoyed killing the Colossi. I didn't care about Wanda's motivation. I did it because those animals were aggressive bastards. Like the previous title Eco, Shadow of the Colossus keeps the story to a minimum, allowing the gameplay to tell the story and drip-feeding cutscenes directly to the player. The overall narrative is akin to a Shakespearean tale. The story is done by a morally suggestive spirit who 100% guarantees that we should keep killing innocent animals to bring someone back from the dead. The cutscenes themselves are either exposition dumps from Dormin or killing the Colossi. Wanda doesn't have any character moments except for one near the end. I won't spoil the ending. I will say that it's almost impossible to get to the end and not feel something. I love that the game has minimal cutscenes. I recently played Death Stranding and the minimal approach felt much better. Without sounding too ostentatious, there are a few games which feel less like a game but more like an art piece designed to evoke emotion. Shadow of the Colossus is one of those titles. Like a painting in a museum, most of the story is not what you directly see, but what you interpret through the imagery. There have been many games where the player has a big open world with nothing to do. Back in 2005, this wasn't as common. Linear environments were the main design choice due to technical limitations. It's impressive to see how Team Eco got this to work without a loading screen at all. The Forbidden Lands are empty, barren, and yet it completely works for this game. I think that's due to the established minimalist aesthetic made by Team Eco. Don't get me wrong, there are variations in the environment. There are mysterious forests and white sands, fruit trees to find, and lizards to kill. The lack of architecture incites this feeling of mystery when you do find structures in the desert, or save points which stand as a relic of the past. You will spend a lot of time soaking in the environment, questioning whether content was cut or they were deliberate choices. I didn't realize how well the HD remaster improved upon the original until I saw the footage side by side. The rendering is far better, especially when transitioning the textures based on the distance calculations. Some areas use a nice blur to transition to the higher resolution models and textures. Others are blatant. I'm not complaining. It can be a bit jarring, however, when you're exploring the lands. The positive decision is that the objects such as lizards or fruit will always be rendered before environments. This makes sure collectibles can't be missed, which I really appreciated. When you're in a more focused environments, you can appreciate the vision of the scenes and how each tree is composed of leaves with depth, grass and fields with layers, followed by water which reacts to your movement. The lighting in this game is both impressive and frustrating. The shifting brightness levels almost blinded me, despite my monitor being at least 40% brightness. The bloom transitions when traveling between mountain ranges, riding through a misty forest, or rising above the water. Upon entering each section, there's subtle adjustments adding to the atmosphere. Especially during the 13th boss encounter, the game is barely comprehensible. The particles are impressive, but I can't see anything when the sun is blindingly bright. The screen is shaking from the Colossus, and the dust is covering the screen. On the other hand, when it's in a dark cave, I can barely see anything. You can get an item for this, but only in hard mode, so that feels useless. It's crazy to me how the light simulated here from 20 years ago sometimes looks better than titles today. Something that really impressed me for a PlayStation 2 game is the animations. There is no reason to have the lizards with shining tails walking around with stamping feet, but it's here. You can see Wanda adjusting his legs when climbing upwards. There's the Colossi who track Wanda visually through their eyes and head. It's subtle, but it adds enough character to create the illusion that this is a creature responding to Wanda's existence. These are small details that add character to the game, which a lot of games in this era didn't. One thing that ruins the visuals for me personally is the motion blur. Motion blur on this version of the game looks terrible. It's smearing across the screen, and it doesn't work when the resolution is a lot cleaner. There's some textures that shift a lot, and this is very noticeable in closed environments. The fur, on the other hand, is the most convincing visual trickery I've seen on a PlayStation 2 game. Instead of being static models, there are layers upon layers shifted to simulate fur. I think it was incredibly smart, but it's ruined by the blur in my eyes. The soundtrack for this game is pretty much perfect. It's dramatic, mysterious, and most importantly, it's memorable. Unless you play this game, you won't understand the emotion the soundtrack inspires in you when you're holding on for dear life and trying to kill that Colossus. The moment you're exploring, there's no soundtrack at all, allowing the player to soak in the diegetic noises. The absence of a soundtrack signifies the isolation that Wander is going through on his journey, further emphasizing the key moments when the orchestra ramps up. I had to complete this game about 6.5 times, 2 playthroughs on hard mode, 4.5 on normal mode. If you hate grinding and repetition, you will be discouraged. The trophies themselves aren't necessarily difficult, they just require commitment. You'll need to kill all of the shining lizards, and yes, kill them, not just collect their tails. If you get the tail and you don't kill them, you won't get the trophy. So imagine my surprise when I find out the last 3 lizards out of the 77 in total are locked behind a door that requires you to kill 15 colossi. I ended up doing 2 entire playthroughs just for those lizards. You'll need to do roughly 3.5 to 4 playthroughs on normal mode depending on how many lizards you collect. This is because you'll need roughly maximum stamina to climb to the temple and obtain all the fruits. Speaking of fruits, they are awful to collect. You have to look for brown and green fruit hanging on brown trees and blending into an overexposed sky. That will fall onto a brown ground, sometimes that are actually underneath the map. This is especially terrible in the temple where I restarted 3 times because the fruits were so indistinguishable from the layers of green leaves and black textures that the fruit was also black. The fruit in the temple is the most insulting reward I have ever seen in a game. I spent hours grinding to get this fruit, killing the colossi repeatedly, and my reward is to diminish all of my progress? That is insulting. Time attack mode is pretty doable for the most part, but it's not until hard mode that my patience began to wear thin. Hard time attack mode, for the most part, is doable if you understand how these bosses work. There are bosses that are so incredibly frustrating that no matter how good the run is, they will shake for 30 seconds and you can't do anything. The bosses I especially despise are number 15, number 9, and number 3. Yes, number 3, the beloved tutorial boss. That boss on hard mode took me 3 to 5 hours to complete. I am not kidding you. I was so angry at trying to beat this boss, I almost quit. But if I can do this, so can you. Shadow of the Colossus is no doubt a classic, and it's definitely an experience unlike any other. There are some dated design decisions, but overall it stands the test of time. The PlayStation 3 version majorly improved upon the original, delivering a consistent experience. The game is frustrating, but if you keep at it, I have no doubt you'll succeed. I will say this, I will never, ever cover or complete the remake. I don't care if it improved things that I've mentioned in this video. This game robbed me of success many times, and I don't need to put myself through that again. It is a memorable experience I won't forget, but it's not one I'll be playing anytime soon. Thank you for watching. I'd love to hear about your experience with Shadow of the Colossus, or perhaps your feedback for the channel to improve. If you want to see a specific game covered, you can either comment below or vote in the poll.